What we wanted to talk about today was what you do with these process maps, how you use them. Basically, the next thing that I normally do is I take the information off the post-it notes and the process maps, and I start to put them on what we call a waste walk, which is really just a sort of a spreadsheet that helps you tabulate the data and help you analyze the data and display the data in such a way that you can start to identify where there's potential improvements. So that's what we're going to go through today. A bit like what we did last week, where we did like a bit of a step-by-step guide. I'm going to give you and show you a step-by-step approach to converting your process maps into waste walks, and then I'll talk you through some of the content on the waste walks, and then how you can use them to sort of identify where you're going to do improvements. So how you populate them with the 7 waste plus 1 information, the data regarding to timings, and data regarding to distances that are travelled as part of the process. So that's the outline of what we're going to cover. This is where it sits in the grand scheme of things. So David did the overview of what lean is, how to identify and get you thinking about where to identify potential improvement areas within the business. Last week we did how to carry out a process map using post-it notes, and then this week it's really a question of converting those process notes and those process maps onto these waste walk sheets. And then what we'll do for the rest of this module too is just talk you through how you then convert the waste walks into ideas of how you actually carry out some improvements, and then how you actually go about running trials on your improvements as well. Detail of what we're going to cover today. So we'll have a little bit of an overview, and then, as I said, we'll take you through a step-by-step guide on doing a waste walk. We'll give you some examples. I'll show you some examples of what I've done over the years from other industries, and then we'll set you the task of producing a waste walk yourself. So I'll send you through a blank template at the end of this session, along with the presentations. I'll send you through a blank template, and we'll send you through the step-by-step guide, which is on a Word document, and then you can get stuck into doing your own waste walk. Everyone just stick the thumbs up if that makes sense, if that sounds like a plan. Brilliant. Brilliant. So, a little bit of a review. This is what David covered as part of what lean is. We talked about these 5 principles, started off by specifying what is the value within your business, within your processes. What are the things that you do that you can get paid for by your customers, that your customers are willing to pay for. So we always start off with defining the value, and that might be things like putting the fruit into the punnets that are shipped to the end customer and to the consumer. It might be a question of putting labels on the products itself. There are things that fundamentally the customer is willing to pay for. From that, once we've defined the value, that helps us then in defining the non-value add, and we spent quite a bit of time talking about tin woods or 7 waste plus 1, so all the typical types of waste that you can find within a process. We also talked about the fact that when you analyse a process, like what we're going to do with the waste walk, what you typically find is somewhere between 80 to 95% of activities don't actually add any value. They simply add non-value add, or waste within the process. And that's where we focus our efforts with lean. That's where lean gets its name from. Lean gets its name from eliminating waste and reducing down the amount of waste. So that's what we're interested in. We're interested in this 80 to 95% of activities. That's where we're going to focus our efforts, and that's where we're going to focus our improvement. So that's what we've covered so far. And then last week we taught you through the step-by-step guide on how you actually go about doing a process map using post-it notes. So you record down on the post-it notes the activity and the distance and the time that's involved, and you basically break the process down into lots and lots of little steps. And the more steps you can do, the better, because normally what you find is by delving into the detail of what's involved within the process, that's where you start to identify these 7 ways plus 1. And it's always important whenever you're doing process mapping, you process map what actually goes on within the process, not what you think that goes on. So this is why we encourage you to actually walk through the process and observe the process itself, and observe the issues, and take loads of photographs and get loads of examples of where you can start to identify issues, any documentation that you can identify along the way, to collect as much of that information as you possibly can, because that just makes the process map a lot richer, and just makes it much easier for you to start to identify where the improvements can take place within the process itself. We also talked about getting a team together whenever you do this. If you're only in a small business, then obviously it's only going to be 1 or 2 people. But if you're in a bigger business, especially one that might go across multi-sites, it might have a separate picking operation from a separate pack house. So getting representatives from all parts of that particular process that you're looking at, and getting them in the room together, and getting them to contribute to what they think the problems are and what their ideas are about improvements. Again, it's just helping when it's starting to generate ideas, but then hopefully overcoming any resistance that you might come across, and getting support from everybody for the improvements that you're thinking about implementing within the business. So it links into this this thinking within Lean, which is you're trying to get as many people involved as possible into the improvement activities, so everybody understands it and they understand the reason why you're doing it, and they get behind those improvement ideas. And then on your process maps, we talked about breaking things down, 2 different coloured post-it notes. So you break it down into the value add, the things that you can charge for, and the non-value add, which is essentially the waste within the process. To make it an even richer picture, normally what I do is I start to identify and call out the problems that I'm seeing, the 7 waste plus 1, and I put them on a separate post-it notes. I put them on green ones, and then stick them onto the process map whereabouts they occur within the process. So I start to build up a picture of where the waste sits within the process itself. And then normally, quite quickly after that, I get people to put onto orange post-it notes what ideas they've got about how they can actually improve that particular process. So linking the problems, and then getting people to think about what are the ideas or the solutions that they've got to actually solving those problems. And again, sticking them onto the process map in the area that they relate to. So you're building up this picture of what the process looks like, where the problems are, and then what ideas people have got about how they can actually improve that particular process itself. Okay, so that's process mapping. We talked through an example of a simple example, but a real example, which is from a garden centre. We talked about producing a cappuccino and the problem that they had in how long it took to make the cappuccino itself. And they did the process map, they identified the waste, and they broke that waste down into value add and non-value add. They got a total lead time for the process itself. They did something which we call a string diagram. So they marked on there the routes that people were taking when they were doing the process itself. This helps you to identify where you've got too much movement, or where you've got people walking backwards and forwards, which can cause issues within the process itself. And then more importantly, they've started to use this to identify where the improvements can take place. So they've started to identify what the new process could look like. They've reorganized the drinks counter itself to smooth out the floor and to reduce down the amount of distance traveled, and also reduce down the amount of backwards and forwards that people were having to do as part of the making of the cappuccino. And then they've gone back and remeasured the process again. So they've validated the ideas that they've come up with and that they've trialed, and they've actually demonstrated by reducing down the non-value add within the process. That's where they focus their efforts on, reducing down the amount of non-value add. They've reduced down the overall lead time down to 1 minute and 14 seconds. So that was the the example that we gave you last week to give you a feel of what we'd like you to do in between that last session and the session today. And yeah, so this is, I've just put some hints and tips onto this, onto the presentation. So I'll let you digest this through at your own leisure when we send out the presentations. But these, over the years, these are some of the mistakes that I've found that I've made when I've been doing process mapping. So this just gives you some ideas. Talked about getting people to keep it up on the wall so they can go back and review it and discuss it, which is what this is talking about here. And then also, if there's people that weren't involved in doing the process map, they can also then contribute, and they can actually stick their comments and their ideas up onto the process map itself. Don't get too bogged down into coming up with the ideas at this stage. Just focusing on recording down all the problems. Once you've got all the problems down, it then becomes much easier to start to identify what you can do to actually fix these particular problems. You can mention a few times during the feedback, you can use these process maps to brief other people. So you might be briefing new starters. You might be briefing other people that work in different areas of the business. You might be briefing managers because you're trying to justify some expenditure, some additional resources. So once you've got the process map, it then becomes a communication tool for communicating the ideas that you've got and why you want to do the things that you want to do. And then I also mentioned about getting as many people involved as possible. And sometimes it really helps if you involve somebody that's never worked in this process, just to get that fresh input and just get those fresh views from somebody that's never worked in this process before in the past. So always consider that as well. Just bringing in somebody that can give some really good input that's never worked in this process before. Okay, so this is moving on from the process maps. So once you've done your post-it notes, the next thing, and some of you already started to do this by putting the data and putting the process maps up onto a spreadsheet. Normally what I do then is I then convert onto what we call a waste walk, which is just a term we use for tabulating the process map on a spreadsheet. So normally what I do, I take all the individual elements from all the activities that are involved. So this is from the one that we talked through, the making of a cappuccino. So you've got on this the descriptions of the activities, whether it adds value or non-value add, how long it takes to do that particular activity. There's a new one I've put on here, new to you guys, from those of you who've done the process maps, which is the numbers of times per day you do that particular activity. So some of the activities you might only do once a day within the process, but there might be other activities that you do several thousand times a day. So this just allows you to add a little bit of weighting to those activities that you do the most frequently. And then what you've got in this column is the on the spreadsheet that I'll send out to you, the template. It multiplies how long it takes to do that step by the number of times you do it per day, and it just gives you the overall cumulative time. So it allows you to start to see, what are the activities that are taking up the most amount of time of people during the day itself. You then got your distance, and then I'm going to talk you through what this bit of analysis that we do, which just helps you identify, which the steps that we really need to focus in on. So which are the steps that have the biggest amount of contributing factor to the overall lead time itself. So this will get you to calculate on your waste walks the percentage of each element. So straight away you can see this is something that you need to focus in on, because it's over 55% of the overall total time to do this process is on one element. So that's definitely one area you need to focus your attention on. You've got down the bottom the amount of value add and the amount of non-value add. So in this example, 25% of the activities actually add value. And then you've got your tin woods, your 7 waste plus 1. So for each of the steps, I've just started to cross and indicate on the spreadsheet what type of waste it is. So this is how we display the process maps that you've done on post-it notes, how we then start to display them on a spreadsheet and actually start to use it then to calculate where you need to focus your efforts and your attentions. So those of you that naturally have realised and started to convert your process maps onto spreadsheet, you can just add this in on the template. You can just add this in as an extra tab on the spreadsheet that you've already started to do, just to help you tabulate the data. So what do we use waste walks for? Process maps, when they're done as post-it notes, it's difficult sometimes to share them. If you're going to email them around, it's a little bit more difficult to email those photographs around and then for somebody to pick up and read through that information. So what we've often found is putting it on these waste walk spreadsheets. It's a good way of collecting the data and being able to share that data around. So that's what it basically does. It collects the data from the process map and then allows you to share that data electronically. I mentioned a little bit about the Pareto analysis. So this is a type of analysis that we do to identify where the biggest amounts of waste are within the process. So what it's the waste walk starts to guide you down is which areas of the process do we need to focus our attention on. But it also gives you a bit of a benchmark as well of what the process was before and then what the process is afterwards, after you've carried out the improvements itself. So it gives you a bit of a benchmark. It gives you a stake in the ground of what the metrics are for the process, and then you can start to see how that improves as you do your improvements. So that's the reasons that we use these waste walks for. Just going back on this, quite often what I'll use is you've got your total lead time, so the total amount of time it takes to do this process, and you've got your percentage value add and your percentage non-value add. I'll actually use these as metrics to see whether things have got better or have gotten worse. So hopefully by doing the improvements, you drive this time down. This time should be less. And what you do is you increase, hopefully what you'll be doing as well is increasing the percentage of value add within the process by reducing down the amount of non-value add within the process itself. So that becomes like the metrics that you use to benchmark the process. So just, again, picking up on that cappuccino example that we went through before. So that's the reminder of what the process map looks like with all the process stages on. And then this is where we've then converted it onto the actual waste walk itself. So that's where we've got the data to populate this waste walk. So this is what I've just been talking you through basically as the detail behind the waste walk itself. So hopefully that's clear. So step one, breaking it down. This is the step-by-step guide. You take the description from the waste walk itself, and then you record that onto the column, which is activity. Then you record down, does it add value or does it not add value? You take down the step time from the post-it notes, so how long it takes to do that particular step. And then I also take down the distance for that individual step and record that down onto the waste walk. I mentioned about we estimate how many times per day you do this particular activity, and then the spreadsheet will then automatically calculate how much time you spend on this step per day, because what it will do is it will automatically multiply the individual element time of the step by the number of times that you do it per day to give you this cumulative time. And what it will also start to do is calculate this individual Pareto percentage. So basically what it starts to do is it takes this figure, this 169,500, and divides it, is divided by the total amount of time for the process. And as you can see, over half of the time per day spent on this process step is within this particular process. So that's where you need to focus your efforts. So this one is a big one. Your next biggest one is the amount of time spent taking the payment. So that's 17%, 16.91. So they're the elements that you need to focus your efforts in on. So the idea of this individual Pareto percentage, which the spreadsheet will calculate for you automatically from the template that I'll send you, is just to allow you to start to identify where you need to carry out your improvements. You've already seen on the right-hand side of the spreadsheet, you've got your Timwoods. So you've got a breakdown of all the types of waste, the 7 waste plus 1. And then what I then do for each of the element steps, each of the activities, I just put a little cross in each of the columns that represent what type of waste it is that we're seeing. And it's not unusual that you'll get multiple crosses for each particular activity. Hopefully what you won't get is you won't get any crosses, any waste against the value add steps. Because normally if it's value add, there's no waste associated with it. So if you do, that means you can break that step down further and you can break out the waste or the non-value add from that individual step. So for each of the steps, each of the non-value add steps, you should be able to cross or put a cross in one of these particular columns. So this is what we're trying to do. We're just trying to take this raw data from the process map that you've done and then display it on a spreadsheet in a tabular format, so it's much easier to actually analyze the data itself. The Pareto analysis. Pareto is the name of an Italian mathematician, and he did a very famous piece of work where he was looking at the economics of Italy going back in the late 19th century, and he actually managed to identify that 80% of the wealth in Italy was held by 20% of the individuals that lived within that country. So there was a very high concentration of wealth within the country. But what he stumbled across was this form of analysis whereby what you tend to find is 80% of the problems that you see within any process comes from 20% of the causes. So, or 20% of the steps. So it's a really good way of prioritizing where you need to focus your efforts on. You can also apply it to sales. You'll find that if you apply it to sales, if you did Pareto analysis on your sales for your business, you'll find that 80% of your sales figures comes from 20% of the plants and the products that you sell. So it's a really good way of identifying, what are the key elements within this business and the key elements within this process that we need to focus our efforts on. So that's what we call Pareto analysis, and we're going to show you how to do that on your waste walks that you'll hopefully work on. So the waste walk, once you've done your waste walk, to get the Pareto analysis, you simply copy and paste all the steps onto a blank template, and you'll see it on the spreadsheet. There's a blank template called Pareto. So you copy and paste all the elements across, and then you organize them so that the highest percentage element is at the top, going down to the lowest percentage element down the bottom. And then if you look at this column here, which has got Pareto cumulative, all this column simply does is add together the percentages that you see in this column. So you've got 55.1 in the first, you've then got 55.1 plus 16.9 gives you 72, 72 plus 16.7 gives you 78.7, and so on and so forth, until eventually you should get to 100% down the bottom. If you've done it right, you should get to 100%. So that's the sum of all the individual percentages. It should give you 100% on the last activity that goes within that step. And then what I'll do then is highlight the top 80%, so as close as possible to it. I then highlight them in yellow, and that tells me where I need to focus my attention. So I know I've got to focus my attention on these 4 elements, because these are contributing over 80% of the waste or time within the process come from these 4 elements. And 2 of these elements actually add value. So the first 2 I need to focus in on is the queuing time and the process step of heating the milk. So straight away, rather than focusing on every single element of the process, by doing this type of analysis, it's narrowed it down now to 2 things that I need to focus my efforts on if I'm going to actually improve this particular process. So it's a really good way of streamlining down where you need to pay your attention and need to do all your trials and do all your improvements around. Just some examples. Just going to give you a few examples of this. So on this one here, this is a strawberry grower. What you've got are breakdowns of all the steps that are involved in actually going out and picking the fruit. The first jobs, first activities are all around the planning side of things. So getting the pick list together, making sure we've allocated who's going to work where, getting the people into the field itself, and then basically getting people to put their personal belongings down and then collect the trays and the punnets that they need to do to actually do the job, being allocated a row of strawberries to work on, and then the actual picking of the product itself, scanning that trolley once they've picked a full trolley's worth of strawberries, get it down to the scan station, basically weighing those punnets and those trays and doing a quality check, entering the data onto the IT system, and then transporting those products to the fridge and then to the pack house. So that's all the steps involved. We've got recorded down here the value add and non-value add. The vast majority of value add is in the actual picking process itself, actually taking the fruit and placing the fruit into the actual punnet. You've got the individual step times involved in doing it, the number of times per week in this instance. So this one we did the analysis over a week. So the number of times per week of doing each of those activities. So the planning one's only done once or twice a week. The transporting people down to the fields is done once a day. And then you've got the ones that are done more frequently, which is picking of the trolleys across 120 people. That's the vast majority of the activity. So when you multiply the individual step time by the number of times you do it per week, you've got this accumulative time that you see down here. And the vast majority of the time is actually involved within this particular process step. You've got the distance travelled for each of the individual steps. You've got the individual Pareto percentage. So that's just simply taking this figure, dividing it by the total, and then expressing it as a percentage. The 7 waste plus 1. So actually indicating in the columns what type of waste that you think it is. It might well be at the same time as you've started to do on your process maps, you started to come up with some ideas about how you can actually improve this process. So you might write some comments and some remarks down here to indicate early on what you could do to actually improve the process itself. This is where I've started to calculate the overall amount of value add and non-value add. So you've got a step there which is the highest percentage step, and on the face of it there's no waste within it, and you quite often get this on picking processes. So you do your analysis, and this is why I put this example in here. So you do your analysis. It tells you need to focus all your attention on step 8, but the process map hasn't revealed any waste. And then what you've got to do then is we're going to show you another piece of analysis that you can use called activity sampling, which really it zooms into the detail of the actual step itself, and we videotape the process, and we slow the videotape down, and we break the process of picking the fruit into even more detail again. And at that level, you can then start to see the waste within the process. And this is and this is why I put this example up. This is one of the limitations of process mapping. It's good at identifying big chunks of waste, like distances, and where you've got people waiting, or where you've got people walking around all over the place, or forklift trucks, or tractors driving big distances. But where you've got lots and lots of small amounts of waste, like you're having a picking operation, it's not as good as identifying them. So we've got other techniques that we use when you get this scenario, and this is one of the techniques that we're going to cover off, called activity sampling, that allows you to break that step down into even more detail and identify the waste within it. So you're right in what you're suggesting. That is the problem within this process map. Thank you, appreciate that. This is from a dairy farm, so very, very similar again. This is on the milking of cows. So description of all the steps involved in doing it, times for doing those individual elements, number of times per week you carry out those activities, number of times total per week when you multiply the frequency at which you do that activity by the individual elemental time. That gives you the total amount of time, whether it adds value or non-value add, amount of distance involved within it, and then it's got indicated on here the what type of waste it is, and then some ideas of what kind of things can be done to actually improve this particular process. So somebody started to identify the steps within this process. So this is, I've put this in here. Again, this is an example I've picked up from one of my team. Can you see some of the problems within the way this data has been displayed? In particular around these two here, in the value add steps. What's the problem that I described earlier? You've got a value add step here, but you've also got some indication there's a waste within the process. So what do you think possibly some of the problem there is in the way the waste walk's been done? Whenever you see this, whenever you see a step that's got value add, and then somebody's actually crossed or indicated a waste, what that tells me is, especially when you see a movement one like that, what that tells me is that actually there's an element of waste within that process step, or it's actually been categorized wrong. So scraping of tops, value add. Do you think, does that actually add any value in the eyes of the customer, do you think, scraping tops of the actual dairy parlour itself? Do you think the customer is willing to pay for that as an activity? If you doubled the amount of time that it takes to do that activity, do you think the customer will be willing to pay double the price for the milk itself? And of course, that is the problem. The problem here is it's probably been categorized incorrectly. So it should, more realistically, that should be a non-value added activity. So whenever you see anything like this, just challenge it. Just challenge, well, what's going on there? Is it been categorized, or is there another element within this step that should actually be walking, movement? So it's just another way of just sort of like displaying the information in such a way that you can actually challenge it, and you can start to carry out analysis like this. And this is why what we're going to do is we're going to set you the task. Between now and next time, I'm going to set you the task of doing a waste walk, filling in one of these spreadsheets. So you've got the process map. We're going to get you to take the distances and the times from your process maps and put them onto the spreadsheet itself. And that's when you really know whether you understand it. Because the first time I did it, I'll be honest with you, I made a right mess of it. And it's only by trialing it and getting it wrong, and then somebody explaining to me what it is that I've done wrong, that I eventually managed to get them right. So that's what we're going to set you to do between now and the next time, using that step-by-step guide, which again you can read through in your own leisure. We'll get you to do this. So hopefully that'll help you. So just some hints and tips on when you're doing this, whenever you're producing the waste walk itself. What I just touched upon, if in doubt, any discussion, put it down as non-value add. Don't put it down as value add, because if you put it down as non-value add, you'll challenge it, and you'll want to spend some time looking at what you can do to eliminate that step. Or if you can't eliminate it, you might want to try and reduce down the amount of time that it takes to do so. If in doubt, put it down as a non-value add or a waste. Make sure you break down the activities into enough detail that you can actually start to see the waste within it. So sometimes it's very easy and it's tempting to group together some of the activities into one description, but the risk is that when you do that, you can't see the waste within the process steps themselves. If you're getting a value add percentage that's a lot higher than 5%, then just go back, and a bit like I was just doing then, just go back and challenge each of the steps and say, look, is that really adding value? And if it is there any non-value add elements within it that we perhaps need to sort of like break it down into 2 steps so we can separate out the non-value add from the value add step? Use the spreadsheet to email around and share it with other team members, so other people can contribute and other people can look at the waste walk and see some of the issues and see some of the problems within it. Make sure you're using the same units, so make sure it's all done in minutes or seconds, whatever you choose as your units for measuring it. Just make sure that you use the same units all the way across the spreadsheet. Otherwise, you'll introduce errors into the analysis. If you can see a value add step that's got a cross against it through one of the tin woods, then challenge that. As I mentioned earlier, by definition, that means there's some non-value add within that step, or it's been categorized incorrectly. So just go back, challenge it, see whether you can break it down even further. And then add up all the individual step times, and that will give you your overall lead time for the process as well, which you can use as a metric for before and after, so you can see what improvements you've achieved on the actual process itself. So just reiterating on that data, we talked about estimates, this number of times per day or per week, whatever you choose. Just get an estimate for how often you're doing that particular activity. Use the Pareto individual percentage to give an indication as to what the priority is of those steps, and that's what this Pareto ranking is. So 1 is the highest priority one to focusing on, followed by 2, 3, 4, 5, down to the lowest priority, which is priority 10. So it's just a way of getting you to identify which elements of the process you need to focus your improvement ideas around. As I mentioned, if you add up all your individual step times, that will give you your overall lead time for the process. So that might be a metric that you use for measuring before and after to see whether the process is improved or not. You've got your total cumulative time. So if you add up this column, it gives you your total cumulative time. So again, that might be something you can use as a before and after metric to see whether things have got better or have got worse. And then this value add ratio. So your value add ratio, you want the percentage of value add after the improvement to increase. So at the moment it's 25%. You'd like to see that increase by 5% after you've done the improvement. You want to see that go from 25% to 30% after you've carried out the improvement. So it gives you again a benchmark for measuring to see whether things have got better or worse when you've done the improvement. So as you're doing your trials, or you're coming up with ideas on what it is that you can do to improve this process, you can use these metrics as a way of judging which of the trials work and which of the trials that don't work, and therefore what are the ideas that you're going to implement and what are the ideas that you're not going to do anything with. So this is how we start to use this data collected from the process map. We can then start to use it to then decide on what actions we're going to take, and then also, more importantly, the success of those actions or not. So that's the data collection side of things. We're going to give you some waste walk handouts. So I'm just going to bring up on screen, and I'll show you the template that we're going to give you. So hopefully you can see up on screen now the SmartHort template. So it's just a spreadsheet. It's got I've started to populate it with the formulas. So as you enter in the data, it should start to calculate some of these figures for you. I've also got a blank Pareto analysis one as well. So once you've done your waste walk, you then convert that into a Pareto analysis. So it just allows you then to display from the highest to the lowest what the steps are that you need to focus in on. So again, it will guide you through doing that particular activity. And then what I've done as well is I've left on there the examples that I put on the PowerPoint. I've left those examples on here along with a coffee shop one as well. So that'll help you when it comes to actually having a look and guiding you through how to actually carry out this particular process. That'll help you, guide you. And if you've got any problems, please do just give us a shout, just give us an email. It's like any new technique, you know, it looks quite daunting to start off with, but once you've done it 2 or 3 times, you realise it really is quite a simple way and a very effective way of analysing a process. So, call to action between this week and next week. We want you to take those process maps that you've started to work on and convert those process maps using the step-by-step guide that we're going to send out to you and the templates, and produce a waste walk. Once we've done that and we've got your waste walks, what I'm going to then get you to show you what we're going to do as part of next week is show you how you can then start to identify and prioritize the actions that you're going to work on. So get you to identify what the quick wins are within the process. So what are the things that you can do they're going to give you the quickest payback within the shortest amount of lead time. So we're going to focus in on that and spend some time talking through what you found and then what trials you can run off the back of this. So once you've done this data collection and you've done this data analysis, what trials can you do in order to verify the improvements that you want to come up with? So that's the challenge between now and next week, is to produce this waste walk from the process map that you've already produced. Or it'll give you a chance, if you haven't had quite a chance to finish off your process maps, it'll give you a chance to do that as well. Okay. I think that's covered everything that I wanted to cover.